Okay, if everybody could take their seats, we can get started. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Matt Pochask, and I'm the Principal Deputy General Counsel for the NRC. We have an impressive number of attendees for this session, many of whom are here in person and even more online. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy your time at this year's RIC. Lots of the NRC's excellent staff are attending the conference this week. In addition to planning these events, they've been working hard implementing the reforms you've been hearing about. So please say hi to them when you see them walking around. Before my opening remarks and introducing the speakers, I wanted to address some logistical items. The Wi-Fi code for attendees is RIC 2026. That's capital R, capital I, capital C, 2026, no spaces. Please remember to silence your electronic devices, and all sessions are being video recorded. There will be a live poll during the session, and following the panelists' remarks, we will have audience Q&A. The Q&A and live polling will be through electronic means for both the virtual and in-person attendees. For those of you in the room, please take a moment to scan the QR code displayed on the screen so you can participate in the live Q&A and polling portions. It will be up there shortly. And as we're finding that QR code, you can also text 22333 to participate in the live poll. Do we have our QR code? I think they're working on it back there. You'll see it. For those of you joining virtually, once you have logged into the virtual conference room and clicked Join this session, there's your QR code. Those virtually can click Join this session, and there will be a box to the right of your screen with tabs for electronic Q&A, live polling, and feedback. You will also have the option of texting the code next to your choice of the poll to 22333. Questions from in-person and virtual participants flow into the same queue, so the questions received will represent the total audience of the session. Okay, on to the topic. In May of last year, President Trump signed several executive orders to jumpstart America's nuclear energy industrial base and improve the efficiency of licensing advanced reactors. Together, these orders emphasize the need for stronger coordination across federal agencies involved in nuclear energy and nuclear technology. Executive Order 14300, which is titled Ordering the Reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, directs the NRC to revise its regulations to facilitate nuclear technology deployment. Among other things, the order establishes an expedited pathway to review and approve reactor designs that the Department of War or Department of Energy have tested and that have demonstrated the ability to function safely. Executive Order 14301, titled Reforming Nuclear Reactor Testing at the Department of Energy, directs the DOE to start a new pilot program to expedite the testing of advanced reactor designs. The resulting reactor pilot program that DOE created is actively working with several private companies to test and authorize reactor designs on an accelerated basis, and that can be later licensed for commercial operation by the NRC. Executive Order 14299, titled Deploying Advanced Nuclear Reactor Technologies for National Security, directs the Department of War to commence operation of an Army-regulated nuclear reactor at a domestic military installation. On October 14, 2025, the Department of Army announced the launch of the Janus program, a next-generation nuclear power program to deliver resilient, secure, and assured energy to support national defense installations and critical missions. The program will build microreactors in partnership with the Defense Innovation Unit, accelerating delivery of advanced energy solutions to the warfighter. Now to introduce our session speakers. Dr. Mehdi Rezi-Fard serves as the NRC Deputy Director, Division of Advanced Reactors, Non-Power Production, and Utilization Facilities in the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation. Dr. Rezi-Fard will discuss how NRC continues to strengthen federal collaboration to ensure safe and efficient licensing of nuclear technologies. Dr. Rian Baran serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Reactors at the U.S. Department of Energy and is joining us to provide insight into the DOE's approach to facilitating this multi-agency coordinated approach. And Mo Badal is a retired Chief Warrant Officer and Program Manager for Nuclear Power in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installation, Energy, and Environment. Mr. Badal is joining us to provide the Department of War's perspective on these efforts. And finally, Yasser Arafat is the President and Chief Technology Officer of Allo Atomics and is joining us to provide insight from the perspective of a participant in the DOE's reactor pilot program that intends to leverage their authorization in future NRC licensing activities. And before we begin, let's have our poll question for the audience. Recent executive orders envision a coordinated whole-of-government approach to nuclear policy and regulation. How will this strategy affect deployment of safe, clean, and reliable nuclear energy? And your options are overall positive, neutral, or overall negative. The clicker will see if we can get the poll up for you guys. There it is. There's your question on the bottom half of the screen here. Okay, and with that, we'll hear from our first speaker, Dr. Razi Fard from the NRC.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So excited to be part of this panel here. Today, I'm going to discuss briefly how NRC is working collaboratively with our federal partners to ensure the safe and efficient licensing of nuclear technologies. Let me start by setting the stage. At the NRC, safety has been our North Star, and it will remain that way. With safety as the backbone of our mission and technical rigor as a core principle, we have been accelerating our licensing activities and the way we approach our licensing reviews. As discussed this morning, recently we have taken a number of important steps in that direction. We've updated our mission statement in response to the ADVANCE Act. We have undertaken a large number of rulemaking activities, including several in response to Executive Order 14300, and we have implemented a variety of process improvement aimed at improving the efficiency and effectiveness of our licensing activities. An important component of these efforts is our collaboration with our federal partners, specifically at the Department of Energy and the Department of War. Each of our agencies has distinct statutory responsibilities. At the NRC, just like our federal partners, we must independently determine whether our regulations are met. At the same time, effective coordination with our partners ensure that we are fulfilling our responsibilities more efficiently and help ensure that collectively we are enabling the safe use of nuclear technologies. Over the past year, I've had the opportunity to directly and frequently interact with our colleagues at DOE and DOW, and based on those interactions and my own first-hand experience, it is clear that safety is paramount for all of us. I will shift gears for a moment and provide a few specific examples on how we are implementing these strategies and strengthening our collaboration with DOE and DOW. As many of you know, Executive Order 14300 directed the NRC to develop an expedited pathway to approve designs that DOE and DOW have tested and demonstrated the ability to function safely. In response, the NRC is undertaking rulemaking activities. The rulemaking process is underway, and we expect to publish the proposed rule in the near future. It is important to note that even today, NRC can consider a wide range of information provided by an applicant in support of their safety case. That information can be derived from testing, demonstrations, or any other source. The proposed rulemaking is intended to provide greater clarity and a specific regulatory language regarding how this information, how the information developed through DOE or DOW authorizations may be leveraged in our NRC licensing. In parallel with rulemaking activities, we have strengthened our long-standing collaboration with DOE and DOW. We are engaging frequently with them at multiple levels across our organizations. Last year, we signed an addendum to our Memorandum of Understanding with DOE to improve coordination on technical readiness and share staff expertise. The updated MOU also allows safety documentation, such as the documented safety analyses for authorized facilities, to be leveraged where appropriate as a part of a NRC licensing review. We are also taking a number of steps to facilitate early engagement with prospective applicants. In December, the Director of the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation issued a memorandum to provide expectation around staff's involvement with prospective applicants planning to utilize a DOE or DOW authorization when pursuing NRC licensing for a same or similar design. We have also reached out to multiple vendors who are pursuing or considering pursuing those authorizations to emphasize that if they intend to seek an NRC license, it is best to have the end in mind and engage with us early in the pre-application stage. Early engagement allows the staff to provide feedback on potential gaps and identify areas where additional attention for an NRC license may be needed. Another activity is developing guidance for applicants and the staff to clarify how they can best leverage DOE and DOW authorization in support of NRC licensing. The guidance will summarize key NRC regulations and available implementing approaches. Additionally, the NRC is working with DOE to develop a cross-path between NRC regulations and DOE authorization requirements, again, to help with those who are pursuing NRC license by leveraging DOE or DOW authorizations. Openness and transparency remains a foundational principle of good regulation, and they will continue to guide our activities. We have been engaging publicly in forums like this one to discuss our ongoing activities. The proposed rule and the guidance will be made publicly available, and we will look forward to further public engagement as those activities move forward. Let me conclude by briefly discussing the landscape ahead. The pipeline of advanced reactor applications over the next few years is unlike anything we've seen before in terms of the number of projects, the diversity of technologies, and the complexity of deployment models. The bar chart is intended to show the volume of applications that we expect. And I put these slides together a few weeks ago, and considering how often we add to these charts, this may be already outdated. At a high level, what this reflects is a rapidly evolving and dynamic environment for nuclear innovation. The NRC has already demonstrated that we can complete independent safety reviews with strong technical rigor and in a timely manner. The other chart on the screen provides some statistics on the reviews that we've recently completed, all on or ahead of schedule, mostly ahead of the schedule. Sustaining that success will require us to continue learning, adapting, and improving our processes. Collaboration with our federal partners will be an important part of that effort. By working together while maintaining our independent regulatory roles allows us to leverage expertise and reduce unnecessary duplication. Ultimately, we all share the same objective: enabling the safe use of nuclear technologies that can strengthen our can strengthen the energy security and support our national priorities. At the NRC, our safety mission remains clear. With that commitment, we are working every day to maintain high technical rigor and ensure that our regulatory frameworks are modern, efficient, and capable of supporting the scale of innovation we are seeing today. With that, I conclude, and I look forward to other presentations and discussions later.
All right, let's thank our speaker. Okay, after Mehdi, we're going to have Dr. Rian Bahran of the DOE. Rian?
If we can do a different slide, just because I don't speak on behalf of the U.S. Army, although this morning I was actually with my colleagues as part of the week-long review that they're doing for the Janus program. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here. I see so many friendly and familiar faces, folks from not just across the U.S. government. I see OSTP, I see folks from my team, I see folks from the NRC, DOW, but I also see folks from industry and the national laboratories, and so I'm really happy to be here. Number one, Matt, thank you for putting together this panel. You have, by the way, a lawyer, a regulator, a technologist, an acquisition program leader from the DOW, and then a vendor and an innovator. So I think we're just one banker away from having the whole ecosystem for nuclear reactor deployment. So I think this is an exciting panel, and it's an exciting time. For those of you that I have not met or you haven't heard me speak publicly, I always talk about, for years I've been saying that we're at a tipping point for advanced nuclear technology deployment. But over the past year or so, certainly since the President put out the May 23rd executive orders, it actually feels like we're finally tipping. It was an exciting year since May 23rd, and I know we're coming on the anniversary. But one of the things that the executive orders did provide to the Department of Energy was really a North Star. And not just in the terms of the direction and the breadth of activities that it told us to do, but it gave us a target. It was to, this time, let's quadruple nuclear energy deployment, 400 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. So if you do the math, and this is not an official U.S. government position, but let's just say by 2035, a credible extrapolation would be, let's say, 50 gigawatts by 2035. And if you want to get there, that means that you need gigawatt scale deployment of new nuclear. You need to have Generation 4 SMR deployment, Gen 3 plus. You need microreactors to start getting into the mix. You need uprates. You need restarts. You need all of the above. Neither of those solutions will get you there. And so that is our North Star. And I think in addition to having a specific target in mind, we also have, for the first time, 3 stars aligning. The government is a true enabler for nuclear technology deployment in a full-throated way. Number 2, the incessant demand for energy, and not just for affordability for the American people, which is a top priority for the administration, but to meet the load growth driven by artificial intelligence so that we can lead. And then number 3 is industry doing things differently and really innovating. And so with those kind of 3 pillars in the Department of Energy, we've been fortunate to be given the direction, the mandate, the focus, and to be an enabler for this ecosystem. So I want to talk about some of the activities that are out of the Office of Nuclear Energy, specifically on the reactor side of the house, which is what I oversee. I'll talk, of course, about the reactor pilot program, because that's where we've had some of the best cooperation across the U.S. government. I'll just tell you, it's not just there, it's across the portfolio that we have tremendous interactions and cooperation with DOW, with the NRC, with Commerce, with State Department and other parts of the interagency. Just this week, so I mentioned this morning, I was with the DOW as part of their Janus review of applicants. Yesterday, I was with the chairman of the NRC as we commemorated TerraPower's construction permit, and congratulations to TerraPower and to the NRC staff for completing that review in a record time. And earlier this week, meetings with Commerce and the State Departments on a whole variety of nuclear technology elements. Everybody is excited. This tipping point means that we're all rowing in the same direction. But let me talk about some of our DOE programs. So the reactor pilot program has been really an exciting, really new initiative out of the department, out of my office. And the idea there is quite simple. If we can provide a pathway for companies that are looking to iteratively test advanced reactor concepts and, by the way, fuel line concepts through a DOE authorization pathway, be able to quickly iterate and test and do prototypes, we think that that will both unlock the ability for companies to achieve technical and regulatory milestones quickly, and number two, provide a fast track to a commercial license. Because at the end of the day, the technical analysis and work that we do in the Department of Energy, it might not mirror one for one what the NRC does from a process perspective, but there are a lot of synergies, and we have been working closely with the NRC. We have codified our cooperation through the reactor pilot program through an MOU addendum that my colleague talked about. The NRC has published an internal guidance memo on how that cooperation looks like. We've had NRC reviewers part of the review team of DOE as both reviewers, observers, and we're actually developing AI tools on doing that translation. So we want this pilot program, the intent was always, if you meet the criteria of being able to show that you can get through the regulatory milestones of the Department of Energy, and of course you have a plan for how to get your fuel, how to do disposition, and you have an execution-ready team, that this pathway could be quite attractive to both allow you to get through those milestones, but number two, to fast track you to a commercial license. So it's been incredible. I think all of you hopefully have seen, we've accepted 11 projects, and as of today, I'm happy to report, we are on track to turn on for criticality at least three reactors as directed by the President by July 4th of this year. And I'll note we published on the DOE website that 4 companies have achieved a pretty important technical regulatory milestone of the approval of their PDSA, Preliminary Design Safety Analysis. And so it's really exciting. We're working closely with these companies. I'm glad that Yasser is here. He'll talk to you about his experience on the kind of developer side of the house. And this has gone so well, I'll tell you, for us, this is not an expanded use of this is an expanded use of our authority. It's not a new authority that we have. And this muscle that we've been able to flex and build has been not just important and useful for companies like Allo, but I do believe that being able to show that we can quickly turn on and really move through these technical and regulatory milestones under the pilot program has been an uplift for the entire industry. People are quite excited about the progress of this program. And so what we've done is, within the past week or so, we've announced Launchpad, which is a new DOE initiative that's intended to have an enduring, think of it as the enduring reactor pilot and fuel line program. So expanded use of DOE authorization to iteratively test reactors, fuel facilities, on DOE sites or off of DOE sites, and it'll be run out of the National Reactor Innovation Center at Idaho National Laboratory. And so we have this now enduring program that we're quite excited about. So in addition to the reactor pilot program, I'm happy to talk about some of our other initiatives. I won't go into any detail on what we're thinking about as it relates to uprates and restarts, but we do think that the ceiling of gigawatts that is available for the current fleet, both through uprates and restarts, is important. And so I'm going to be on a panel on Thursday, and so feel free to come and attend. But that's a focus area for us this year. Number two, I think all of us are concerned about the supply chain. And I'll say, not out of my office, but out of the Office of Nuclear Energy, we put out within the past few months $2.7 billion to ensure that we have the capacity needed to enrich uranium, both LEU and HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium, which, as the person who oversees the reactor programs, this is incredibly important and timely. I think we all know that the gigawatts that are needed to deploy, whether it's by 2035 or by 2050, we have to have a secure supply chain, so that's been an important development. We've also been continuing to fund, of course, the advanced reactor demonstration programs. I mentioned TerraPower's excellent regulatory milestone yesterday. We continue to see milestones both on the technical and regulatory side of the house from X-Energy, from Kairos, that of course started nuclear construction last year. I visited them a few weeks ago. These are programs that we continue to be committed to and are exciting, important public-private partnerships for first-of-a-kind deployments of Generation 4 technologies. We also recently released $800 million for Generation 3+. To enable fleet mode deployment, we awarded $400 million to TVA and GE and $400 million to Holtec for initial and hopefully subsequent deployments of their advanced technologies. And we're not stopping there. We're looking to do everything that we can in the department to enable nuclear technology deployment. So we have our appropriations, we're using our authorization. We're also trying to make federal land available for deployment. And so the department has put out multiple RFAs, being able to solicit both energy generation and data centers to take advantage of our federal lands and the attributes and the characterized land that we have there. And so a lot of excitement and interest, not just in Idaho National Laboratory, which is the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy National Laboratory, been in other sites, including those stewarded by what was the artist formerly known as EM. There's a new name now for the Office of Environmental Management. It's the Office of Nuclear Restoration and Revitalization. A lot of excitement and interest in their land, and we're supporting them well in that endeavor. We're also working closely with the Energy Dominance Financing team, and they have an important role to play. It's, you've heard the Secretary talk about this. Hopefully, if you've been in any of the forum where the Secretary is engaged, this is one of our strongest tools, being able to provide loans out of this $260 billion lending authority that the department has. So a lot of exciting activities, the government being an enabler here, and truly incredible partnerships with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, from not just the leadership, but my counterparts that I see in the audience today and the staff. Everybody is rowing in the same direction, and we're seeing it and we're feeling it. I'll just end, and I'm looking forward to Q&A. I'll end by saying, I was watching TV with my wife the other day, and I have a 16-month-old at home. And there was all this stuff in the news, and it was, mostly, bad things that are happening in the world. And then there was a positive news segment on nuclear. And it was only positive. There was nothing negative. And I think, the public sentiment and the importance of public support, I think the public is excited about the prospect of this cool technology being able to unlock the energy needed to do all the things that we need to do as Americans, as society, to win at AI. And I will say that for us in the department, safety continues to be paramount. You'll see it in all of our talking points, and the NRC continues to be the gold standard there. And so we're just excited to be playing this role. One thing I did not mention, and again, feel free to talk to me afterwards, we are focused on AI, ensuring that we're unlocking nuclear energy that's faster, cheaper, and safer. So the Genesis mission is a big initiative, but the big takeaway there is that we're looking to take advantage of artificial intelligence in a real way, not in a buzzwordy type of way, but to really use that to expedite and unlock deployment and make it cheaper. But what I wanted to leave you is, we are, at least in the department, really happy to be enablers. We understand where the community is, which is everybody's rowing in the same direction, and we're grateful for the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Rian. And as we're going to invite our next speaker, I'll remind you all to submit your questions if you'd like to have them considered for Q&A. Our next speaker is going to be Mo Badal from DOW. Mo?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a retired Army guy, so without slides, I wouldn't know what to do, okay? So you set the bar too high, Rian. So, by the way, so it is a distinct honor to be here today with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's Regulatory Information Conference. This conference has long served as a vital platform for collaboration and discussions on most pressing issues on nuclear safety, regulation, and technology. This audience right here, your presence, is a testament of that. I want to thank Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Matt for putting this panel together, and coordinating and bringing us together. This is an incredibly exciting time for the nuclear energy. The innovations we are seeing in advanced nuclear reactor spaces, including our interest in microreactors, is unprecedented. And there is a big promise here for a clean and more resilient, secure energy future. For the United States Army and the Department of War, the pursuit of advanced nuclear energy is a critical component of our modernization strategy, and it's directly supporting our national security. Our collaboration with the regulatory bodies like Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Department of Energy is foundational. We cannot do it without them. As we move forward with our initiative like Project Janus, we've talked about a couple of times already, we're actively engaged with the vendors this week, looking at their proposals, which we aim to deploy within our installations with a rigorous and transparent regulatory oversight. I cannot emphasize enough that our partnership with Department of Energy and Nuclear Regulatory Commission will help us achieve our goals. Next slide, please. Oh, I have to do it. Oh, somebody did it for me. Thank you. Okay, so first, before we talk about our regulatory environment, what I would like to do is kind of talk about our history a little bit. So it's not first time that Army is thinking about regulating nuclear reactors. We have done that in 50s up to 70s. We built reactors. We had government-owned and reactors, including a Burge. We called it Sturgis. So at the time, which is similar to today, our goal was to develop small, even portable nuclear reactors to provide power and heat to remote locations is inaccessible and they're with logistical challenges. Today, we are with Project Janus, with our regulatory arm, Army Regulation 50-7. With the framework today that we have is regulating a prototype reactor, but then currently actively rewriting our 50-7 permitting process for our installation commercially owned and operated microreactors. The key terms here is really, it is behind the meter and then for critical infrastructure for defense purposes. Okay, so why are we doing this? Previous speakers talked about the power of executive orders. As you know, anniversary is coming. May, there was 4 different executive orders. One specifically was for the DOW and it's specific to the Department of the Army, telling us what we have to do. President Trump have published these executive orders and telling us that we need to rapidly deploy and develop advanced reactors, enable private sector investment and innovation, collaborate regulatory effort with DOW and DOE. So through Janus program, we have partnered with Defense Innovation Unit, you heard from Rian, which is actually, we're receiving their pitches this week. We are exploring microreactors up to 20 megawatt electric. This slide really emphasizes that our partnership with Department of Energy and Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We're actively, right now, finalizing our MOUs and MOAs and identifying the supporting and active role they will play in writing and supporting our acquisition pathway. DOE is really a key enabler when it comes to nuclear fuel supply chain, exploring opportunity for long-term spent fuel management, and then when it comes to regulatory environment, we will be working with their subject matter experts as we go forward. I would also like to mention about last couple of years or so, we have been working actively with 5 different national labs from the Department of Energy who has been actively involved in Project Janus right now in our source selection process. In this slide, kind of lays out our integrated regulatory approach. Here you see top left and the center that we will be depending on some inherently established programs from Nuclear Regulatory Commission and DOE's feedstock, fuel fabrication, fuel transportations, and then the green boxes you will see will be focusing on mainly siting, design, construction, operation, decommissioning of systems, and supporting Army missions. As we go forward, we'll maintain transparent relationships with our partners and require coordinated technical subject matter expert support for our regulatory functions. At the end and the life cycle of our plans, or while during the life cycle of our plans, we plan to work with our DOE partners and NRC partners, make sure we have a good plan for our spent fuel and its life cycle management. Here, Army's mission focus. Regulatory framework is established to ensure our reactor safety, plant reliability, radiation safety, environmental protection, and security across all life cycle functions. Our framework is grounded by clear regulatory program objectives, effective regulatory instruments like permitting, programs, regulator oversight, and required reporting. And lastly, defined regulatory requirements when it comes to technical basis for safety. The foundation of the regulatory program objectives is to have a strong safety culture and operational discipline, an ethical foundation. We want to achieve trust of our families and service members where we'll be using this technology in our installations. Meanwhile, engaging our public directly while we're at installations and building trust with the allies and partners. Bottom line is, we will be doing this with the whole of a government approach. This is my last slide. This slide really shows our regulatory process steps. What we have done, because we are exploring first-of-a-kind reactor, and so we have to start at the beginning. So as we go through the initial design review process, we're looking at the conceptual designs, and then concept of designs and initial design, looking at what are those regulatory preparedness that vendors should have, create a pre-application process, identify those engagement opportunities early, and understand the technical basis for the design maturity. As we go through the process from preliminary design to final design, our permitting activities involving construction permit and operating permit at the end, also decommissioning permit. Bottom line is, we are developing an agile process as we explore new technologies for our installations. The Army expects to regulate vendors through its performance-based and emphasizing integrated safety and design approach for development of microreactors. So again, just want to echo my colleagues to say safety is paramount. We will not compromise when it comes to our families and our installations. Again, just in closing, I want to say thank you again for putting this panel together and giving us an opportunity to come and work together here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. And now we'll have our last speaker for the panel portion. It is Yasser Arafat of ALO. Yasser.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an immense pleasure for me to be here today, particularly alongside my esteemed colleagues from the various agencies of the government. My name is Yasser Arafat. For those of you who don't know me, that is my real name. Okay, let's dive in. Let's take a look at what happened in the first atomic age. We built a lot of reactors, right? 135 commercial systems built over the last 50, 60 years. And the approach we have taken is called economies of scale. And that makes sense because when you double the size of the reactor, you get more than double the amount of power. So it naturally made sense to scale it up larger and larger over time so you can get better economics. Now, that is all good and gravy, but now the reactors have become a little too large that it takes quite a lot of time to build them, especially in the West here, probably a decade or so to build a gigawatt scale plant, and that's great. But if you look at the largest load growth that we're seeing right now today, it's from AI data centers. For a similar sized data center, they're building them in 2 to 4 years. So there's a big gap in the deployment timeline between what is available today and basically what the customers are really looking for. So if you ask me, like, what does a second atomic age look like? It looks like the product that can fulfill the right-hand side, and which is this. So instead of leveraging economies of scale, we would like to see leveraging economies of numbers, where you're not making the reactor larger and larger, you're just building them more in quantities. When you have quantity on your side, we believe you can come down the cost curve significantly faster. So to the point where from a single factory, you'd expect at least a gigawatt worth of production every single year. And if you want to have more, you can build more factories. This idea is not necessarily new, but because of the large growth demand we're seeing in AI data centers, it's enabling such a high, it's creating the business model for factory-built reactors to come into life. So at Allo, we are essentially focusing entirely on creating that muscle to mass manufacture nuclear reactors. We want to be the ones to make factory-built nuclear reactors a reality. So as we were designing our reactors, we were trying to focus on how do we essentially build a lot of these components and structures and systems in a factory setting, in a controlled environment, so that we can be better at it over time. So that's our pilot factory in Austin, Texas, and we've been doing a lot of hardware building as we're designing and perfecting our reactor systems. So a single pilot factory will not do a 1 gigawatt a year, so we're launching a significantly larger factory, and it's surprisingly very similar name to Elon's Gigafactory. It's called Gigawatt Factory because we're building at least a gigawatt, and that changes everything, right? Gigawatt, I'm kidding. It's going to be a massive 1 million square feet facility, and we'll be spitting out at least 100 reactors a year when it reaches its max capacity. The whole idea behind the Gigawatt Factory is we want to really keep the manufacturing within the United States. And right now, even though a lot of our supply chain and vendors are US-based, there's a small fraction that is not US-based. With quantity on our side, we would love to bring them onshore the supply chain in the US. And third, any customers who's looking for resilient power, that could be AI data centers or DoD installations, will be able to provide those systems, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And lastly, US leadership, right? Over the last 30 years, we have not built a lot of reactors in this country, just built the 2 units. And during that time, China and Russia literally got ahead. And they're not doing anything new. They're essentially copying what we have done in the first atomic age. But this new model and architecture, US can really renew our leadership in what the next generation reactors look like. Okay, so let's dive in. They say that even though we're trying to vertically integrate a lot of our manufacturing in-house, you still need a village to build a nuclear reactor. So we've been focusing on trying to build a robust supply chain that can go along with us as we scale. So far we've had 127 suppliers across 35 states and 6 countries, and so we've been building our muscle on the supply chain as well, because that's one of the critical things we have to do. But ultimately, our goal is, even though we're 90% US sourced, we'd like to see that 100% US made for our reactors. Again, our technology is selected in such a way that what we say is there's no unobtainium in the reactor, right? Either we could buy it from somebody like a sensor or a turbine, or we can make everything ourselves. Because we want to not only recite reactors in papers, we want to see a real system operational in the field. So with that said, I'm going to say something very audacious here, which is our goal at Allo essentially is to build at least 1 gigawatt by the end of this decade. That's like literally 4 years away. With our manufacturing model, we have high confidence we can get there. Okay, for those of you who don't know who Allo is, we're a relatively very young company, 2.5 years in. Literally, we started off with 2 person in 2023. Now we're 140 strong and growing. We've raised a lot of funding from the venture capital side of things. There's a big chunk that I cannot announce it just yet, but it's significantly more than what's here. And we've built a pilot factory that you can see the picture here on the top-hand side. That's our pilot line at Austin, Texas. And we also have another office in Idaho Falls, designing the reactor itself. But as a company, what we have leaned on is really developing sodium-cooled reactors. And if you look at all the advanced reactors out there, sodium-cooled reactors had 800 plus reactor years worth of operation, so which is the highest after LWRs. So we're leaning on that technology, but we have not built those systems. We can't just say, oh yeah, people have built it in the past, so it'll work. So we are trying to build our own muscle through this technology maturation roadmap through our own manufacturing capability, trying to build heat exchangers, cold traps, pumps, all the various technologies needed to build proper sodium systems. And as you can see, from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, that would take us from TRL 6 through 9 and would get to TRL 8 in the next 12 months. So we're pacing through very, very rapidly. We've already finished sodium test loop. It's already commissioning and testing right now. That's entirely designed, built, and commissioned by ALO so that we can qualify our components that will go inside the reactor. The next one is probably what a lot of people are excited about. It's our critical test reactor that we're building under the reactor pilot program that will give us the validation data of how our core reactor technology works. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The ALO 0, that's the non-nuclear side, right? The critical test reactor will not produce power initially, but ALO 0 is going to test all of the heat exchangers, full-scale non-nuclear prototype of how our power plant works. And once you have those two elements taken care of, then we will build our first nuclear power plant. That's the ALO X. And the idea behind ALO X is it will produce all the way from heat generation to electricity generation and show how the entire plant works. Once that is done, then we will go first commercial in our ALO pod that basically have 5 of those reactors. So bottom line, what we're trying to do right now is, yes, we have done a lot of sodium-cooled reactor technology in the past, but by the end of this year, we really want to become the nation's expert in sodium-cooled reactor technology. So let's focus on what's happening on the reactor that will help us achieve President Trump's executive order to go critical. We call this Project First Light. That's going to be our first reactor. What you see here essentially is the building that's housing the reactor and all the components needed. We're well in our way in having the system up and running. Just to show you a timeline here, we started breaking ground on September 4th. That was literally a week before I had my baby. So essentially I'm raising 2 kids at once. But that really, all the things that you see in green are essentially things that we have accomplished so far. And I really want to give a big shout out to the Department of Energy for really creating the ecosystem and the right NE standards to be able to move fast through that pipeline without sacrificing quality and safety. By the way, going fast does not mean going unsafe. I just want to make sure we clarify that. And we're well in our way trying to achieve criticality before July 4th of this year. So building is made, the reactor is built. In fact, we just shipped the reactor 2 days ago from our Austin facility, and it is 1 hour away from reaching its destination. Not that I'm not tracking. Okay. And fuel will be made this month, and we'll be able to go critical pretty soon. Okay, with that said, I want to highlight everything that you see here in this building is fully designed, built, and tested, and will be operated by ALO. This is not something we are, shipping it off to others, because ultimately, to build a fleet of nuclear reactors, we have to be able to know how to go through the entire ecosystem ourselves, including creating some of the safety management programs that you need to actually deploy a nuclear reactor. So, 115 days to go, and we're going to make it. Not that I'm not counting either. Okay, so all of these things are the starting point. They're not the end game. The critical reactor that we're building right now is ultimately, and the ALO 0 full-scale non-nuclear prototype will be feeding towards the north of that figure called the ALO X. That will be a reactor that will go complete full power, make 10 megawatt electric out of the system, and be able to power a co-located, co-built data centers that we're going to run as an experimental module. So this will be the first time we'll build a data center and a nuclear device simultaneously and connect and then collect the data to run this efficiently. So all of these are happening on exactly one site, 2 acres. And thanks to DOE and Idaho National Lab to be able to provide that infrastructure for us to build there. Real quickly, if you zoom inside the ALO X, this is what it looks like. This is the complete plant if you tear away the building. Both the primary and secondary systems are sodium cooled, and we have a steam generator on the tertiary loop. It's basically a sodium thermal reactor. Because we are a thermal spectrum reactor, we don't need HALEU. We can run from 5 to 8% UO2 fuel. We don't have to worry about where we're going to find this fuel. When we scale up to hundreds of reactors, we can leverage the existing commercial supply chain to get there. And all of our, because we're an advanced reactor, all of our fundamental safety functions are done passively. And lastly, everything that you see here is being designed so they can be factory built, so that 95% of the stuff can be built in the factory, only 5% done can be done on site. So once we prove that out, this is our commercial product. This is called the Allopod. This is the machine that will ultimately go through NRC licensing for commercial purposes. The 50 megawatt electric plant, essentially all it has is what you see here in the previous slide times 5. Basically, you know, and the turbine is the only difference. We can have individual turbines or shared system, but bottom line is basically 5 reactors, you know, powered by a single turbine, so that if one of the reactors goes down, we have 4 other to keep the power plant operational. That's important for our customers, and customers that are looking for high availability. That kind of architecture is what really unlocks it. For example, data centers or U.S. military bases. So. This is my second last slide. All of that background information that I showed you is to lead up to this. You know, we are one of the few companies who are actually working with all of the various regulatory bodies in the US, primarily obviously the DOE, and everything that we're learning from the DOE reactor pilot program, we want to maximize leveraging those information, those data, those safety analyses down to the other programs. We already have a regulatory engagement plan with the NRC. We've been engaging with them simultaneously, almost on a weekly basis, and we're gearing up towards submitting our first commercial license this year. You're the first ones to know this, by the way. And then obviously we're also trying to explore, working with DOW/Army. I can't talk much about the details there. It's an active solicitation, but the point is, like, you know, we should try to look at, if you think about a whole one government and how we can leverage the various offices together, this is a kind of a highly proprietary regulatory strategy that I'm showing you guys to show like how we're taking the learnings from the DOE and goes into potentially the Army Reactors Office, and from there to the NRC, so that ultimately it's not just about, you know, licensing a particular project. It's about how do we license a fleet of reactors, right? So, yeah, happy to be here today with you all and excited to dive into the panel questions. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Yasser. Okay, before we move to our question and answer, let's see if we can get a look at our live poll results. And the question was, recent executive orders envision a coordinated whole-of-government approach to nuclear policy and regulation. How will this strategy affect deployment of safe, clean, and reliable nuclear energy? And it looks like we have 62% think this will be positive, 26% neutral, and 12% negative. You guys can continue to participate in the poll as we go through our Q&A. Many of you submitted questions here. I appreciate that. You can continue to submit them. Can't promise we'll get to all of them. And we're going to do some questions that are targeted at a particular panel speaker, but the whole panel can feel free to chime in if they have something to add, and others will open up the floor to any panelist who wants to grab it. Let's start one for you, Mehdi. How is the NRC ensuring its regulatory role remains both independent and effective in this all-of-government approach?
Thanks for the question. I'll start from what I said in my presentation. We do have distinct statutory responsibility, and at the end of the day, NRC has to independently make a determination on whether NRC regulations are met or not. So full stop there. I talked a little bit about the rulemaking that is underway, the guidance that we are developing. At the end of the day, an applicant has to meet the NRC regulation. If there are some certain cases that they need exemptions, that is still within the frameworks that we have, and they have to make the case for it. But any applications that comes to us has to factor in how they're meeting how they're meeting NRC regulations that are applicable to them. I'd go kind of a bit higher and go to the Atomic Energy Act in terms of the provisions that are there to ensure robustness, effectiveness, and kind of independence of the agency. There are provisions such as hearings, ACRS reviews, the scope of activities that are within ACRS purview, that again ensures robustness and independence of the agency when it comes to licensing activities. Our regulations are developed through processes that are open to public. Same goes with our guidance. Applicants have to docket their information when they come to the NRC. So it is an open and transparent process that ensures the effectiveness and ensures the independence of the agency. And again, that all goes back to how our statutory responsibilities are set in the Atomic Energy Act.
Thank you for that, Mehdi. Okay, how about one addressed to Rian? Rian, what is the status of the reactor pilot program, and what lessons are emerging in permitting, siting, and interagency analysis?
Hold this down.
And keep holding it. No, it's not working.
Okay. This is interagency cooperation. I have both NRC and DOE offering to support me. Really, a lot of us, we've been pleasantly surprised by how well the reactor pilot program is going. I think, the ability to flex a muscle that we already had. So let me just backtrack. For those of you that have not paid attention to the Department of Energy's ability to use DOE authorization. So of course we already have advanced test reactors at the national laboratories. And more recently, we had been working with the Department of War on Project Pele, which is a prototype project led by Office of Secretary of War for SCO to be able to iteratively test and demonstrate a transportable microreactor, a high-temperature gas reactor. So, that's an activity that's been going on, I think, since 2018 in close cooperation with not just DOE Office of Nuclear Energy, but Idaho National Laboratory. So we've had already we have a muscle of technical experts that understand advanced microreactors, that understand how to do that type of iteration, both from a technological maturity perspective, but also an oversight perspective. And so, being able to build and flex that muscle for the pilot program to be able to meet the President's objective, it's going well. It's going well. We're on track. There's a lot of lessons learned, I think, for us, working with the companies that have met us more than halfway there. I think, I've been excited to see how they're able to kind of iterate and work with us. And work with it's not just the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy, it's Office of DOE Idaho, which is the regulator in our case, and it's the embedded staff from the NRC and other parts of the interagency that are helping us with this support. So we've learned a lot of lessons on not just authorization, how to move through it in a safe and secure way, but to move quickly. But we've learned about things related to permitting. We've learned about use of things like other transaction authority, and so there's quite a few different pieces, and so that's why for us, we've launched this Launchpad initiative that's taking advantage of all these lessons learned so that we can continue to offer this for the country. Let me just, I want to end the answer by saying that the cooperation for us with the agencies isn't just about our reactor pilot program. This interagency ecosystem is, we're helping companies quickly iterate and test, But at the end of the day, the Office of Nuclear Energy's mission is to enable nuclear energy deployment, and so I'm equally excited about the Department of War serving as a first mover for microreactors, right? This is, for the longest time, we've known that if you make reactors smaller, they will be more expensive unless you can get a big enough order book that allows you to do the factory fabrication that Yasser mentioned. But that first mover is always something that's been maybe around the corner. There's always potential off-takers and developers. But the Department of War being a first mover, benefiting from the acceleration that we're providing the pilot program, and then the NRC being there to help with the commercialization, because ultimately Department of War isn't going to buy all of the, how many microreactors, Yasser, did you have? 50,000 in there? I don't remember. But ultimately the commercial industry will require an NRC license.
Thank you, Rian. How about one for Mo at DOW? Is DOW pursuing a standardized reactor design or acquisition model across multiple installations to streamline safety review? And how are NRC and DOE engaged in developing those standardized approaches?
Thank you, Matt. I would use another Army, lingo. Form, fit, function is very important to the military, right? So when we're talking about exploring nuclear energy for the DOW and the Army, we think about energy in two spaces: installations, Project Janus, we're actively engaged in that space, but also there's opportunities in operational energy space where we're looking for more smaller, mobile, transportable reactors, smaller size. So in this space, I would say, no, we don't have any specific technology we're championing or driving. We would say we're open to looking at the technology readiness level, your organizational readiness level, and then we're open for business, and Project Janus is one pathway to get there. I just want to also mention larger SMR, reaching our whole installation resiliency is a pathway also, which is with our utility providers, partnership with achieving broader resiliency on our installations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. And let's do a question for Yasser. Yasser, from your vantage point, what aspects of interagency coordination between DOE, NRC, and DOW have been most effective in providing regulatory clarity and deployment confidence? And where would additional alignment further facilitate safe and timely commercialization?
They're all great. I'm going to start by saying, kind of like from our perspective, from our vantage point, our experience. So obviously, the first thing we've done was submit a regulatory engagement plan to the NRC, trying to make sure that as we develop our technology, we can bring them along the way. When we started, for those of you who don't know my background, I was, leading the MARVEL program at Idaho National Laboratory. That was a DOE authorized reactor. And that was our first exposure to DOE authorization, and we saw how well it went. And before even executive orders came out, when we wanted to build our prototype reactor, we decided to go DOE auth, because of our familiarity, and we know the process, and we know that it's a more agile approach for new things that has to change along the way. And so before executive orders and DOE authorization was even in fashion, we decided to go down that path for a first of a kind. And fast forward, because of the announcement of the reactor pilot program, there's a lot of folks that are competing for resources on the regulator side. And one interagency collaboration that I think Rian and both Mehdi talked about earlier is, DOE did not have all the resources to perform all the reviews. So NRC actually, there were 12 reviewers that were brought in from the NRC side as a result of the MOU, which really completed the regulatory review team. So a lot of people don't know this, but it's a combination of folks from both DOE and NRC when they reviewed our PDSA, and now they're reviewing our DSA. That's the kind of interagency collaboration that we'd like to see. And it solves two problems. One, the resource gaps, but the second, those NRC reviewers are now familiar with the technology that we will ultimately go to them for licensing, right? So a lot of, not just the documents, we can use them for pre-licensing effort, but the folks, we're bringing them along the way and preparing them how this new, first-of-a-kind new technology is going to work. The other aspect of the interagency collaboration that we really appreciate is the fact that there's very clear roles and responsibilities of each regulatory body, right? DOE is there for first-of-a-kind prototyping, doing it rapidly, but also maintaining the safety and quality. But then we can take all those learnings for, ultimate commercial licensing. That's NRC's role, right? That's pretty clear. And then obviously DOW is exploring how these technologies can fill a role for making the US installations more resilient, right? So there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration. And that leads me to the second portion of your question, Matt, is what else could be improved in this process? These improvement that you're seeing has been many years in the work, and obviously the executive order accelerated or boosted those. But there's a lot of movers and shakers within DOE, within NRC, within DOW that are enabling this kind of collaboration. Where I see the future working out in a way where we're acting as one government is taking all of this work one step further, which is if we go through DOE licensing and prove that the reactor works safely and we developed all the basis for it, when it goes to the NRC or DOW, so that it does not have to be re-reviewed all over again. If we can formalize policies so that one agency can lean on the review of another, I think that will be an amazing future that all would be looking forward to. So, thank you for the question.
Thank you, Yasser. All right, I'd like to ask a couple that I can get maybe some governmental and private industry perspective, and some that I can get perspectives across the government agencies. This one's a bit of a conceptual question. How important is standardization of definitions and regulatory approaches for effective collaboration among government agencies and to achieve streamlining efficiencies? I'd love to hear from the regulator's perspective, the importance of standardization or maybe benefits in having more flexibility, and likewise from Yasser.
So I'll take a stab at it. Without minimizing the importance of standardization, and there has been many efforts, not just nationally but internationally, to standardize requirements and guidance, which can give us a lot of benefits. I want to highlight that we are kind of in an environment, going back to what I said in my presentation, in an environment that we need to move quick and we need to think outside the box and be risk-informed. So the fact that certain language in guidance or regulation may not be exactly similar, I hope that's not holding us back on how we are moving forward in terms of making safety determinations. It will take, again, there could be, in the long run, there could be benefits to that. But we have reviews underway right now. We're expecting a large number of reviews coming our way. With or without kind of standardized regulation or guidance, we are going to move as efficiently as we can. But it's one of the tools that down the road, if it's established, can help us even make things, do our reviews even more efficiently.
So let me offer the DOE perspective, and really, ultimately, we want to hear from Yasser, but Mo, you can chime in as well. I think from my perspective, and I know there's different terminology. When we say DOE authorization, they say licensing, the Army says permitting, and then if you go through kind of the stepwise processes, it is different vernacular. But I think fundamentally, the safety analysis and review is still quite similar. But I will say two things. Number one, we do have, our teams have been working at looking at, there's no major gaps that would stop something being authorized by DOE from getting a commercial license, fundamentally. There are certainly things that we can kind of improve, and our teams are working to identify some of those challenges. And one of the things that we are doing is we're actually developing an AI tool that's going to translate, we're working with industry on this, that's going to translate from a DOE license to an NRC application. So, you know, from my perspective, the collaborations between the agencies are going well. The differences are not showstoppers. And by the way, we're developing tools to streamline that and make that a seamless process. And so I think from our perspective, we think it's going well, but I ultimately want to hear, you know, from the developer.
I would like to give you a little perspective from, you know, the DOW Army's perspective. So we are using 91B defense purposes, you know, permitting process. So in that space, we're trying to keep our, I would say, permitting process limited to up to 20 megawatt electric in this space. And if it's beyond that, we would like NRC to regulate it because in commercial, you know, journey. Even though these reactors that we're pursuing will be contractor owned and operated, but they're behind the meter on our installations. But in terms of commenting on the standardization, I think there's some consensus because as we are rewriting our regulatory framework, we are informed by the DOE's standards and regulators. So it's not like we're doing this in a vacuum. So already we're looking at the existing processes and then trying to figure out what does that look like for the DoD. But we will be independent regulators ourselves, informed by the subject matter experts from the DOE and then NRC. Thank you.
I can talk about this for 3 straight days. So standardization is our bread and butter, and it's not just, and this is what really enables the factory first model. If you have different models for every single site, the factory model falls apart very quickly, right? So, and it's not just the design, by the way. It's the design, the manufacturing lines. I mean, for a particular system, we have a line built up to develop a particular sized equipment out of it over and over again. The moment you change something because your customer wants slightly different things, all of a sudden that has to be revamped. So that does not work. So standardization is extremely key to efficient factory manufacturing. Same thing on the construction. When we want to go to a site, and even though we say like, you know, hey, we're not a project, we're a product, there's some project on-site work that's needed, and construction is part of that. You don't want to do different construction scheme every single time you go to a different site, right? You have to have a standard approach, almost a IKEA manual, and you get the kit of parts, and you have to like install them on-site over and over again. That's the only way you can get positive learning, right? So that's really important. And one of the key examples that we have seen is, like, even if you change the size of a particular component even slightly, there's non-recurring engineering that's involved in every single thing. So we want to pay for those things once and build it over and over again. Like, for example, primary coolant pumps. We talked to our partners at Flowserve, and we gave them the specs for the primary coolant pumps. They're the pump manufacturer for ALO. And there's some NRE, non-recurring engineering cost, and then the cost of each pump. The second time we went there and say, oh, we also need sodium pumps for the secondary side. They're slightly different here and here. And there's a big NRE cost added to that because of that same reason. So just to give you a glimpse of how important standardization really is. And so, you know, one of the things that we have to evolve on the regulatory side that is a little bit different than the first atomic age is we have to start evolving our thinking from it being a project-based licensing to a product-based licensing. And there's been a lot of efforts in the last few years to enable that. But I think we still have to have one more step added to that is, you know, in the future, we're not going to see, you know, 1 or 2 gigawatt scale plant only. We're going to also see, as Ryan was mentioning, a host of other reactors that are numerous amount on the same site. We may have 50 or 60 or even 100 reactors on a site that are smaller in nature. So every time you deploy these in a fleet mode, what regulatory framework do we use? Let's say if I have 40 reactors in one site, if I have another site that wants 60, do I have to go through the regulatory review all over again, right? How do we evolve ourselves from going into a one-off project to a fleet mode is going to be extremely crucial for really seeing the appropriate right-sized licensing framework to deploy these smaller reactors?
Sorry, I'm going to double dip here. Mo said something that triggered some thought. For awareness, at a very high level, when it comes to guidance space, there is already quite a bit of overlap between guidance for NRC reviews and guidance for DOE and DOW. Just wanted to note that.
Just two fingers, well. You know, I see a lot of heads nodding when Yasser was speaking, which is why I wanted to hear from him. I think one of the things that's absolutely paramount for our industry, I mean, regulatory certainty, not just transparency because we care about safety, but to provide that certainty so that cost and schedule is not impacted for future deployments, whether it's microreactors all the way to gigawatt scale. You know, we understand that's the name of the game. So that's why, from my perspective, kind of hearing from you, you know, we feel like we're working diligently to ensure that there's clarity on responsibilities and frameworks. But I do want to say I know that there's always more that can be done. So I know that from our perspective, it feels like it's going well. But the most important piece, in addition to the safety, is reducing any uncertainty associated with cost and schedule that comes from regulatory uncertainty. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Rian, that's a great segue to my next question. It's a discrete one for Mehdi, which is, there's a lot of talk of regulatory efficiency, but is it possible to put a number on that? Building all this interagency cooperation, how many months is NRC realistically looking to get a license review time down to?
Is it okay if I say it depends? So it really depends. As you know, as Rian said, there are a number of projects that are going through the pilot program now, and they range from criticality tests, short-term criticality tests, to more developed complete models. And depending on the maturity of the design, the complexity of the model, you know, that can impact eventually how much of that an applicant can leverage in an NRC license. That's what I mean by it depends. If it's a criticality test, again, we're going to use any information that we can in the context of a licensing review to leverage that, but the overlap may not be as significant as for a larger model. So unfortunately, I can't put a number to it. It's going to be a range. We'll look into, one of the key messages that I wanted to leave you with is that considering the number of reviews that we have ahead of us, we are going to look into every aspect of efficiency that we can gain. If it's leveraging DOE authorizations, process improvements, or any other aspects. So if there is information that we can leverage, we'll definitely do that. You know, quantifying it is not easy to do at this time.
Okay. Can I provide the vendor perspective on this? So panels are not fun unless it's spicy, so I'll make it a little spicy. But I want to say, like, I mean, obviously, from our perspective, if you think about what the Advance Act outlines, it's 18-month review. So the question is, how much better can we get from those 18 months, right? And there's a lot of activities within the NRC and DOE that is moving in that direction, especially for smaller and extremely safe, low-dose, low-consequence reactors. And there's a lot of rulemakings that are in the works, which we are really excited about. But ultimately, I think for our business model to work, for every story there's a demand and a supply. So I'll talk about the demand side. I can put a number to that. I mean, our regulatory review process have to go down to 6 months time frame or less. Now, how do we achieve that? It's not like putting the burden on the regulator, but to work with the regulator on how to achieve it. How do we do that? So, and I kind of went through my last slide very quickly, but ultimately, if you have a standard design, we can go and actually figure out a way how to have a reference COLA associated to the standard design, and every time we're on a site, they don't have to review everything from ground up, right? It's the delta that usually come from site-specific information that we'll have to focus on. So is it possible? Yes. Is it aggressive and is it possible on day one? Probably not, The first ones is always take a little longer, but as we get better on the reactor manufacturing side, we can make it faster and cheaper. Regulatory reviews are going to be essentially the same, right? So I think we're all moving in the right direction, but ultimately 6 months or below is really the timeline we have to hit. We have an internal goal in Allo where from the time a customer picks up the phone and says we want a reactor, by the time we hand them the keys over during commissioning is less than 12 months. You know, it may seem impossible to do, but if you look at the reactor pilot program, from the time we got awarded to be selected under the DOE pilot program, by the time July 4th happens, that's a 10-month range, right? So it is possible. It's just that we just need to all work together towards that timeline.
Okay, we have one more final question for all speakers. What does success look like to each of you for this coordinated government effort to deploy advanced nuclear technologies? Or, said another way, if I transported you 10 years into the future, how would we know we were successful? Mehdi, you want to start?
All right. Success. I would say innovation can move forward with speed and without any compromise to any aspects of safety. That means that there needs to be clarity, predictability, and transparency on everyone's side. A developer or vendor needs to know exactly what they can accomplish through DOE or DOW work, how NRC is going to consider that in the licensing review, and again, the whole ecosystem, if you will, needs to be clear and transparent so that there is clarity and predictability for applicants, for regulator, and the whole process. I just want to, again, I've been hitting on transparency a few times today. In terms of success, I want to expand on transparency a little bit here. It is important to continue having public confidence in the process. We are, at the NRC, in the government, we are public servants, and it's important to maintain the trust that they have in the work, in our licensing activities. Once they see the transparent process, they're going to see that they're not cutting any corners. It is a predictable and it is a efficient process to get to safety conclusions. So to me, like I said, innovation can move forward quickly without any compromise to safety.
So to me, I hope that we can get to a future where investing, like purchasing nuclear reactors, buying that electricity is just boring, that it's just mainstream, right? We want to get to an order book of advanced reactors, micros, Gen 3 plus, Gen 4, and gigawatt scale, a true order book, not maybe PPAs or some MOUs, but credible offtake, so that it unlocks not just this energy, to meet the goals of our country, but unlocks the ability for companies like Yassers or others to have the supply chains that they need, right? The biggest answer for a supply chain is an order book, right? That'll allow companies to expand their capacity for the different components. It'll help our workforce issues. So we just need order books of reactors. And to do that, we have to buy down the regulatory uncertainty while maintaining safety and security. We have to help ensure that the commercial viability, you have to bring down costs of these technologies. We're doing that in Department of Energy through investments in enrichment and in the technology. So it's an all of the above, but that's my hope. And so that we can, maybe after this break, we'll go and sit outside and the sun hits us, and then Matt will maybe, start getting a similar brown color like the rest of the panel. And we can actually be hopeful that we get to this end point where this is a boring technology.
Okay, I don't know how to follow that. So I'm thinking, and he just, okay, so I think there's two things I would like to share. But first is, what is our short-term goal? And so we talked about President Trump's executive orders. We're hell-bent, okay, that we want to help development and deploy nuclear energy for us, for the nation, and we want to regulate our space because I think we can remove the barriers. We truly believe that with our partnership with DOE and NRC. So we want to do that. We want to meet our timeline. And I think if you know the military, we like to control our space as much as possible. So we're going to do that. And then the long-term strategy is really, if you talk to any military leaders, they'll tell you, we want to have on-site power generation sources. We want it to be islanded. And then we want to be able to provide energy that can meet like 5 nines, basically, without any failure, right? The mission security and then our national security agenda. So I think that's our imperative.
Success is for Alo when we become the largest energy company in the world. No, this really is a time-based question, right? And earlier I've showed you, like, our near-term goal is to really deploy at least 1 gigawatt of installations by 2030. That's pretty aggressive, and I think we may be the only company trying to like make a bold statement like that. But that is very important to us, right? We cannot claim that we have manufactured something in a factory model over and over again if we did not prove that. And the way I see by the 2030s, multiple factories deploying essentially, authorized or regulated or licensed by all 3 agencies, where we're not only providing power to AI data centers, and again, if we cannot provide the right solution to this massive growth, the grid's going to really suffer in the long run, and our grid is not designed to grow that fast compared to what data centers need. So we have a moral imperative to provide a solution there, as well as for the US installation bases, right? So there's a lot of bases that are currently relying on the national grid, and if the grid goes down, they only have 2 weeks worth of power, and we want to be able to change that with nuclear power, and we can. So to me, from an energy security perspective, Alo can play a big role there, and unless we see reactors in every basis providing reliable power that is independent of the grid, I don't think we're successful yet. So it's really a time-based question. But I think we have a long road to go. The reactor pilot program is exciting. Janus is very exciting. But also, where the rubber will really hit the road is when we can deploy a lot of the systems commercially in large quantities and be able to collect field data, improve our products, and be able to, we don't want to see a future where when you say, oh, nuclear energy, oh yeah, they'll be coming in the 2030s. We don't want to see that future. We want to change that right away.
Well, thank you for attending the panel, and let's please thank our speakers.